My name's Chris Michael. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Ozone. We're a software company which provides technology and services for central banks and market makers centrally, but also banks and financial institutions globally.
So I've often described Chris as the rock star of open banking. So don't be shy now. So open banking started, 3 years ago now?
Well, open banking started, actually open banking's been going about 20 years, but in the old model. I mean, I think what we've seen, starting with the CMA order in the UK, we've seen open banking really starting from 2017, 2018, but it's really only been in the market for, I'd say, 3 or 4 years to any significance.
So you were the CTO of OBE. So you were instrumental in building the APIs and the architecture and the design. Please just talk us a little bit about that, because it's history in the making, it really is.
Sure. So my role was to lead the development of the open banking standard in the UK, and that was somewhat of a challenge because we were dealing with regulations that weren't fully formed or weren't complete. We were dealing with banks who wanted to do one thing, FinTechs who wanted to do another thing. And the real challenge was getting people to agree on what was the right thing to do. And the way that we did that was we tried to focus everyone on the use cases for the end user, the personal banking customer, the business banking customer. What's the right thing to do for those end customers? What are the right use cases that meet their needs? And therefore, what standard do you need to enable that?
So that's a lovely segue, because I'm intrigued. Tell me about the use case. What's driving the market? What are you seeing, and what can you share with us?
Sure. Well, it varies actually quite a lot depending on which country you're in. But effectively, you've got regulatory drivers in different parts of the world that are mandating banks and financial institutions to provide APIs, but they're also providing a licensing framework and a liability model for third parties, for FinTechs. But then you've got the market drivers themselves. So, for example, in the US, there isn't a specific open banking or open finance regulation, but you've got some of the banks self-organizing and providing APIs around a common standard. But it takes a lot longer when you've got that model in place. Where you've got the regulations coming in and putting firm deadlines in, then what you tend to find is all of the banks moving at the same time.
So all of the banks moving at the same time. Lessons learned in the UK?
Yeah, I think that's the theory. So in the UK, we actually had two sort of overlapping regulations, the CMA order and PSD2. And the CMA order governed and mandated the CMA 9, the 9 largest retail banks, and the PSD2 covered all of the banks in the UK and in Europe. So it wasn't quite everyone moving at the same time. But even then, there wasn't, across the whole of Europe, there wasn't a mandate to implement a single standard. So banks followed the regulations to varying degrees. They didn't all do it in time. In fact, very few of them did. But what we're seeing now in other parts of the world is a much tighter regime, much tighter conformance or requirement to conform to a single standard. And Brazil's a good example of that, where the whole market is moving pretty much at the same time.
So talk to me about Ozone's expansion plans, because they are phenomenal. You're a small team, an agile team, but you are making things happen around the world. Please share more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we've only been going 4 years. We're kind of organically self-funded. We provide software for just over 50 banks and financial institutions now in the UK, Europe, Latin America, Middle East. And our model is really to extend that significantly through partnerships. So we have a very strong partnership model in different parts of the world. We focus on the software and some of the core enabling services, and we work with our partners so that they can provide the implementations into the individual banks, and they can provide the third-party services on top of the core API. So what we do is really just provide a very thin layer that deals with all the complexity of open banking and open finance. It deals with the identification of third parties, the security model between banks and third parties to ensure the APIs are secure. It deals with the consent management, and then it maps whatever banking system or API that the bank has already got, it maps that to a common standard. And that's really our USP, is that we are very much standards focused. We want to make sure banks and financial institutions all over the world can meet all of the requirements of the standard and do it properly, so that it just works. It works out of the box, if you like. And that's really what we're trying to do on a global scale.
So all over the world, global scale, it's a massive opportunity, but to be selective, where are you going next?
Well, so I think the big areas for expansion for us now are the rest of the Middle East. We're already working in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. The rest of the Middle East is now starting to implement open banking over the next few years. And in Latin America, we're already quite active through our partner in Brazil, but the rest of Latin America is following soon quickly. So there's everywhere from Chile, Mexico, Argentina, everywhere's looking at open banking, and whether it's a strong regulatory driver or not, what we're trying to help influence, if you like, is the conformance to a good standard that works, that's already tried and tested, because we've seen the UK standard started to work really well now. Brazil has largely copied that and fixed some of the issues and filled in some of the gaps. And we're seeing this now in different parts of the world, that there is an appetite, if you like, to follow what's working and build on top of that. And so if we can help encourage regulators and standards bodies globally to follow that and build on that rather than trying to reinvent the wheel, I think that makes a lot more sense, and it will speed up the implementation in the markets.
So in terms of trends in the UK, we're moving from open banking to open finance. Mm-hmm. Talk to me a little bit more about the use cases. Is payment still, you called it before, the poster child? Is payment still the poster child? Will it always be the poster child? And what's hot and what's not?
I think right now payments are starting to really drive the use cases and the usage of open banking APIs, and we've seen that in a number of cases in the UK. I think that's going to carry on. That trend will carry on for some time. But what open finance really brings is the ability for customers, whether you're a personal customer or business customer, to get a much more rounded view of your finance or your finances. And I think that model, when you open up to other financial products like investments, savings, pensions, etc., you can really provide a much better service for end customers. And where I think the next iteration is going to be the combination of open finance and payments, because combined you can really help users manage their money much better. Payments on its own is great if you're talking about paying a tax bill or paying for services, but if you want to help people really manage and understand and manage their money better, then the combination of open banking, open finance and payments, that's really where it gets interesting.
Sectors that are going to really fly in open finance, what do you think they might be?
Well, I think it's actually an iteration beyond open finance where I think it gets really interesting. When you look at what I would call open retail. So you look at basket level data on not just the fact that a customer has spent £100 at Tesco's every single item in their basket. If you can get that retail data, combine it with the banking data, combine it with payments, all of a sudden you've got something that's really powerful and really valuable. It can help with merchants with offering promotions. It can help with customers getting automated sort of loyalty schemes and benefits. It's really, really powerful. And that's something I think it'll address one of the key problems we've had with open banking to date, which is there hasn't yet been a really strong alignment of incentives. The banks across the UK and Europe have pushed back to quite a large extent about open banking. But if you start to bring other data sources in, and the banks can use that data to provide better value to customers, not just on their own, but in partnership with FinTechs, then I think you're really onto something, because there'll be aligned incentives, because it's all about providing value to customers. And there are some very clear revenue models if you look at loyalty schemes, more relevant advertising and promotions, for example.
So is that banks working, collaborating, the word that we love at OBE, with FinTechs, or do you think every bank will want to become a FinTech and just generally?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And some banks genuinely do want to and quite possibly will become big FinTechs in their own right. We've seen NatWest with Payit, but I think a more realistic and achievable objective for many of the banks is to partner with FinTechs. Banks are good at a number of things, but traditionally they haven't been good at technology. That hasn't been their strong point. I mean, that's the whole point of FinTech. And I think banks partnering with FinTechs is the model that I think will really scale. And I think that's the whole point of open banking and open finance. It's to enable that partnership and that collaboration. I mean, it does also drive competition, but it's all about collaborating together to provide better services to customers.
It's incredible. So we've all of a sudden moved from open banking through open finance to open data. So what are Ozone doing to make all this happen?
Sure. So we're doing two things. One is we are working with a number of regulators and central banks globally to help them define and implement standards and a strong conformance to those standards. And the other thing we're doing is working predominantly through partners to provide APIs that help banks and financial institutions offer an API that is 100% aligned to that standard and meets not just the regulatory requirements, but the commercial requirements of what we call premium APIs. I mean, that's what the banks are really interested in doing. But if they use our software, our platform, they can do that pretty much out of the box at a much lower cost than trying to build their own APIs themselves.
In a quick masterclass, what is it? Talk to me about the model. Yeah.
Sure. So, I mean, what we have up until now in the UK and Europe has been largely regulatory APIs in terms of open banking. So the regulators have said to banks, you must provide this API, you must provide it free of charge, without contracts, etc. Premium APIs are where you extend the functionality of those APIs beyond the regulatory requirement, beyond what's the mandated minimum, and therefore the banks have got an opportunity to monetize that. And that could be providing it, I mean, potentially open finance could entirely be a premium API model. In some markets, we're seeing the entire payment APIs being proposed as a premium API model that banks can offer any sort of payment API for a commercial charge. So it makes a lot of sense to have this construct of premium APIs because banks are then incentivized to do good APIs because they can monetize them. But there are different models on how banks monetize those APIs. And I think the key thing here is that this is where it's really calling out for, in a particular market, a central player. It could be the regulator themselves, it could be a commercial entity, one of the big Visas or MasterCards for playing that role, but providing effectively a bit reluctant to call it a scheme, but effectively a scheme where there's standardized contracts, standardized pricing, or certainly parameters of pricing. So it makes it fairer and easier for banks and third parties to engage to commercialize these APIs. All of those things, absolutely, all of those things can be added on and included. I mean, they could be separate as well. But if you have a central player providing those commercial services, it just makes it a lot easier. Because one of the challenges we've seen, for example, in the US, is they have got now an emerging standard, the Financial Data Exchange FDX standard, and a number of banks are starting to build to and implement that standard, actually quite a large number, but it's difficult for the banks to enter commercial contracts with a large number of smaller FinTechs. So they tend to prefer to do contracts with 2 or 3 of the larger players in the market, which is one model, but a lot of people don't think that's particularly fair and doesn't necessarily encourage innovation. So having a central player or players in a market that provide these commercial frameworks and including, as you said, liability, dispute management, I think makes a lot of sense.
Talk to me about the next sort of countries we should be really, truly watching out for, because you do have your finger on the pulse.
Sure. I mean, I think countries in Latin America are very interesting. I think particularly Mexico, it's a big market. There's a large number of financial institutions that are likely to come into scope. So I think that's a very interesting market for us as well as commercially. The Middle East, though, is really interesting at the moment, particularly Saudi Arabia. I think Saudi Arabia.
Saudi, not so long ago.
Yes, I know. Yeah.
Me in present and you virtually.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, Saudi's an interesting market. I think they have a really good opportunity to piggyback off and learn from what's happened in the UK, what's happened in Brazil, what's happened in Europe. And hopefully, if we can get the model right there, it'll be really exciting. We have an opportunity to get both banks and FinTechs completely engaged from day one, and all of the incentives aligned. And I think that's what's been missing so far in most other markets.
So engaging the ecosystem, isn't it? So which is a lovely segue into my last question. Money 2020, very much like OBE, we engage with the open banking, open finance ecosystem. Money 2020 engage with a wider FinTech ecosystem. Key takeaway. I know it's day one, but key takeaway from what you've seen so far.
Well, I think I haven't. If I'm being honest with you, what I haven't seen is too much about open banking here. It's still a bit of a fringe thing, I think, in terms of the wider financial service agenda. But you're starting to see quite a few of the well-known FinTechs who started to get stands here. There are more of them than there were in previous years. And I think gradually open banking, open finance will become a much, much bigger topic and an agenda at events like this.